We are always told that the Kraken is just a legend, a story woven from the fears of sailors when they see a giant creature rising and disappearing into the dark water. But the truth may be even scarier, because hundreds of millions of years ago, the ocean actually had creatures in the form of the Kraken, not only real but also dangerous and dominating the food chain in a way that no longer exists today. And the strangest thing is that they are completely different from the squid we know. So what happened to these monsters, and why does the modern ocean no longer have a place for them to exist? The true origin of the Kraken is not entirely clear, but most researchers agree that it comes from human encounters with giant cephalopods, creatures with long tentacles and sizes large enough to haunt anyone who sees them. There are estimates that the Kraken is about 50 meters long, which is already giant, but there are also exaggerated stories that it is miles long and can sink battleships. Although monsters miles long almost certainly do not exist, but giant cephalopods are completely real. And it is worth noting that they appeared long before modern giant squid evolved, which means that the concept of the Kraken is not just imagination, but also has a real biological basis in the evolutionary history of the ocean. If you go back about 450 million years, you will not see the soft squid of today, but instead giant creatures in strange shapes with long cone-shaped shells. That is the orthocone, one of the first ancient kraken to ever exist. They could be up to 7 meters long or even larger according to some estimates. And although they look clumsy, they were actually the top predators in the food chain at that time. While today we often think of giant squid as the most terrifying sea monsters, the reality is completely the opposite, because these ancient kraken were the creatures that dominated the ocean when there was not much competition. And what made them dangerous was not only their size, but also the fact that they had almost no natural enemies at that time. Although giant squid today can be more than 12 meters long, most of that length comes from long and thin tentacles, if we consider the actual mass. They are not as large as the ancient orthocone. Some orthocone species can weigh twice as much as a modern giant squid. And more importantly, squid today are no longer at the top of the food chain. They have become the main prey of sperm whales, which turns the creatures once considered monsters into part of the ocean's meal. So despite their large size, modern giant squid are actually just an intermediate creature in the food chain, not a dominant one like their ancestors. One of the reasons why giant squid today cannot become true kraken is due to their biological limitations. Their blood does not transport oxygen efficiently in warm water environments, forcing them to live in cold, deep seas where light is almost non-existent. This makes their lifestyle passive and dependent on hiding instead of active hunting. They are no longer the kings of the ocean, but just like creatures living quietly in the dark, existing by avoiding detection rather than dominating their surroundings. And it is this specialization that has limited their ability to evolve into true monsters. Orthocone possessed an extremely unique mechanism that helped them control their buoyancy. Inside the cone-shaped shell were gas and water chambers connected to each other by a tube called the siphuncle. By pumping gas into these chambers, they could float up, and when pumping water into them, they could sink down. This mechanism is exactly the same as the operating principle of modern submarines, but has existed for hundreds of millions of years. This helped them move flexibly vertically in the water and created a great advantage when hunting. They could quietly float up and then suddenly rush down with all their mass to crush their prey, a tactic that was both simple and effective in an environment where there was little competition. However, orthocone's biggest weakness lies in their ability to turn. With such a long and stiff body, turning around is almost a nightmare. They can move quickly in a straight line, but it is very difficult to change direction, like trying to steer a bus underwater with just the head. This makes them extremely vulnerable when facing more agile creatures. And it is this weakness that became the deciding factor when the ocean environment began to change, when jawed fish began to appear, especially those with strong biting abilities like ancient sharks. The ocean's landscape completely changed. Slow and clumsy creatures like orthocone could no longer compete. They were gradually hunted and became extinct. For a long time afterward, the ocean no longer had true krakens, but instead a new ecosystem with many different predators coexisting and competing with each other. About 300 million years ago, the kraken returned, but in a completely different form. Instead of long, straight shells, they coiled into a spiral shape like a giant waffle. These were ammonites, especially the Prehistoric species. This creature could reach a shell diameter of over 2 meters and weigh over 1.3 tons, making it one of the largest cephalopods ever to exist. Coiling their shells made them more compact and easier to maneuver than orthocone, like upgrading from a bus to a tank, allowing them to adapt better to an environment full of predators. If a giant ammonite and a modern giant squid were placed in the same environment, the outcome would depend on many factors. Ammonites had the advantage of mass and a hard shell, making the squid's tentacles almost useless in a direct attack. However, squid have the advantage of speed and intelligence. They can move quickly and attack weak points like the soft body parts exposed outside the shell. If the ammonite completely retreated into its shell, the fight could become a stalemate. But if forced to fight, the squid would likely win due to its agility and better tactics. Later, a new group of cephalopods emerged with a completely different strategy. They shed the heavy outer shell or shrunk it inside their bodies, making them much lighter and faster. These are the ancestors of modern squid and octopuses. Becoming soft allowed them to move more flexibly, but it also made them more vulnerable. So they needed a new defense mechanism to survive in an ocean full of predators. The solution they developed was the ink sac, a chemical weapon that allowed them to create a cloud to blind predators and quickly escape. This mechanism works like a biological smoke grenade, and it has become so effective that almost all modern cephalopods possess it. However, for species living in the deep sea where light does not exist, the ink sac becomes useless and is gradually eliminated during evolution. Historically, there have been hypotheses about other krakens, such as Tully or even the Triassic kraken, believed to be of enormous size and complex behavior. One famous hypothesis suggests that a giant octopus hunted marine reptiles and arranged their bones into deliberate shapes. However, most scientists believe this phenomenon is just the result of currents and natural decomposition. Nevertheless, these hypotheses still show the mystery of cephalopods in history, as most of their soft bodies are not preserved in fossils. Today, the ocean is no longer a place where large size equates to absolute power. Predators like sperm whales and killer whales use intelligence and echolocation to hunt, making giant creatures easy targets. Additionally, human activities such as boats and fishing make the environment unsuitable for the survival of giant creatures like the kraken. Therefore, although evolution has repeatedly created such monsters, current conditions no longer allow them to exist. Although the kraken may only be a part of the past, the evolutionary history of the ocean shows that nature has repeatedly created incredible giant creatures. And who knows, in the deepest seas, there may still be things we have not yet discovered. If you found this story interesting, please like and subscribe to the channel to not miss the next videos, where we will continue to explore the most terrifying mysteries of the ocean.